What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 299. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, just like every week, Scott-Vargas. LSV, how are you, sir? How was Eternal Weekend?
It was great. I had a lot of fun playing Vintage. I kind of went 7-1 drop, but it happens.
I saw that on Twitter. What you had your flight for a time that made it so you couldn't realistically win the tournament in that time frame.
Well, it's not only
what is wrong with you?
Well, it's not that I couldn't win the tournament. It's that I couldn't even know if I was in the top 8 because it was 10 rounds. I just thought it would be less rounds, which is, it's awesome that so many people wanted to play Vintage, but
of course.
And it also is just like, it came to the end of the weekend, and I got to admit, like, I can't claim to have a heart of a champion if I chose to fly home instead of finish out the tournament, but it was just, it was like, well, I can fly home now, or I can play another round to see if I make top 8 and then try to win, and I don't know, just that it was close, but I decided that flying home and, making it to work on Monday instead of like staying overnight when I didn't have a hotel room and didn't have necessarily a great plan to get home. It was
fair enough.
Discretion is the better part of valor.
Yeah,
like that.
Yeah, and also, while the Eternal Championships are cool, we're not talking about a pro points, big money. There is that on the line as well.
Winning the Mox Emerald pinning would have been awesome, and I really wish I could have stayed, and I could have stayed. I'm not saying I couldn't have stayed.
Yeah,
but I also this is kind of coming at almost near the end of a string of weekends where I wasn't at home, and I flew back from Detroit the weekend before at like 6 a.m. I just
you got to pick your battles. I get it. It makes
exactly
sense. Yeah.
So.
I want to remind you, of course, not you, Luis, that this show is brought to you each and every week by channelfireball.com. You can go there to find a whole array of awesome free content. You can find articles, videos, and podcasts from some of the best players in the game, making content to help you improve at Magic. We know that that's why you're here listening to the podcast. And if you want to help yourself along that route, Channel Fireball is a great place, a great resource for improving. Also, they host GPs occasionally, including GP Seattle, which is the gpctac.com, where you can find more information about the GP. It's happening November 6th through 8th in Seattle here. And it's Legacy. So, if you happen to be a constructed old school player and you like your Legacy, this is going to be one of your only shots of the season to play Legacy at a high level. And GPs are the highest level you get to play Legacy at these days. So you don't want to miss it. And again, you can find out more information at gpctac.com. If you'd like to support the show more directly, you can do so at patreon.com/limitedresources. It's a site that lets you give back to the show if you'd like. It's optional, but you do get some cool perks and bonuses for doing it, including some nice giveaways that we're going to be doing. We're not doing it on this show, but in 2 weeks' time, we will be giving away a bunch of cool stuff. Again, we're giving away one of the Delver of Secret playmats that is going to be available only at GPCTAC. And we're also giving away a couple of those Pirate Lab bags that I put the review up. By the way, the review's up on lrcast.com on the blog, so you can get a look at what those bags were like, in my opinion, at least. And I'm going to be sending those to a couple of lucky Patreon subscribers as well, as long as the regular monthly giveaway, which includes kind of an LR gift pack, which gets you some sleeves, stickers. You get a button, you get an LR shirt, assuming that you happen to be the sizes that I have left because I'm running a little low on them. And if not, I'll give you something else sweet instead, a playmat from one of the GPs or something cool like that. And you're automatically entered in that as long as you're a patron. Any amount, doesn't even, you can just come on there and give a little tiny bit per show. You can pay whatever, 50 cents a show, and you'll be in there. You also get a thank you card for signing up. One other perk that you get is you have the ability to submit questions to be read on the show. Now, we don't guarantee that they'll all get read, but they certainly have a good chance of it. Last week, we went through a whole bunch of them. And this week, we've got one from Brian Howard. He says, I seem to be plateauing in my MTG abilities at the moment, but I still have a ton of room to improve. By the way, I love that Brian notes that he's got a ton of room to improve. I think a lot of players feel like they're good enough, and why aren't they just winning more?
The easiest way to stop improving is to think you don't need to improve.
Agree, yeah.
You stop looking for opportunities. So even though Brian says he's plateauing here, I think this shows that he's at least, aware that there's a lot to go and looking actively for ways. So that's already a start, even without hearing the rest of the question.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a big thumbs up to that start for saying it that way, Brian. He says, the problem is I'm not sure what to focus on. In regard to my play style, how can I identify what needs improvement the most? And he says, I don't play online, so I can't record my games and look back at them. Because I think he knows that we do recommend on the show that if you play online, that you record your games or go back and look at the replays when those are working. And you can look back and see how you actually played a game, and you can get a very interesting perspective on it, where it's one of these things where you don't realize that you're making mistakes or that you're taking lines or that you just miss something because you're so focused on certain aspects of, your play when you're in the game itself, and you can see it when you kind of zoom out. So, Luis, what do you think, if you're not able to record your games? He's talking about his play style, which, admittedly, we don't know what Brian's play style is, but, how would you go about addressing that if you felt like that was an issue for you?
It's tough. This is a kind of general question.
Yeah.
I think one way to do things is to just at the end of every match, probably not game, because you if you're in the middle of a match, you want to just keep focusing on that. But at the end of every match, look at things you could have done differently and try to identify those decision points and, what could you have done better there? Maybe you'll analyze and conclude, you actually made the right decision and that you gave yourself the best chance to win. But the kind of post-match analysis I found very valuable. When you, like, the things I talk to my friends about most when it comes to, like, what matches is talking about the decision points and seeing what they would have done. And I find it very valuable. I feel like I get a lot out of it, and I assume that Brian would also do the same. Just looking at, and even if it's just jotting down the decisions that you think are close and try to talk to other people, or even just look at it yourself. Like sometimes I'll just go over it myself. I'll be like, well, I know I could have done these things differently. During the game, you can't, spend 6 minutes planning out this whole line of play, but after the game, you can kind of go back and try to reconstruct, well, what happens if I decide to bolt the other thing instead of what I did bolt? Or what happens if I decide to not attack there? And you kind of try to plan out the turns from there. And then also you have the advantage that you've seen what your opponent plays afterwards. Like during the game, you decide whether to attack or not, and you don't know what they're going to have. So you have to make a decision with limited information. After the game, you can look at what they ended up having, and that can help you kind of simulate what would have happened had you chosen the other line. It's like, well, I didn't attack. It turned out my opponent did have the Unholy Hunger, so they would have killed my now untapped blocker and attacked, and how is that different? And just by looking at all those possibilities, you can figure out ways you can, either improve or ways that you think you did correctly, and then kind of go from there. That's just one way to cut down a lot of the gameplay specific mistakes. The bigger picture stuff is different because that's, I guess refer to maybe the episode where we talked about we're having a plan.
Having a plan, yeah.
That's the thing I just really always harp on, because that's the biggest difference, honestly, when I watch someone play, whether I think that they're good at Magic or not, is whether they have a plan. Because the people who are just playing their cards, there's just a limit to how good you can be, because you're not working towards an ultimate goal, and you're just your actions are kind of disconnected from each other. So really make sure that you're not falling into that space. That's, I think, one of the biggest level up moments I ever found in my, entire career playing Magic.
Now, interesting that you were saying to focus on these, these critical moments in a match. Would you say that that's a skill in and of itself, to be able to identify the moments, these inflection point moments that happen during the course of a game of Magic, that to be able to go back to that and say, this was the point where if I make the correct decision, I have the biggest impact on my ability to win or lose the game here?
Yeah, I think part of the reason that it's big to look at those specific moments is, other decisions may have impacted the actual outcome of the game more, but often those aren't decisions that you have a lot of choices. Like,
right.
Yes, maybe attacking and then your opponent ends up having a way to tap your 3 remaining blockers and kill you impacted the game, but it was not necessarily right to play around that card, or maybe, overextending into a sweeper was bad, but you didn't know your opponent had that in their deck and it was just wrong to play around it. So those aren't as interesting, because a lot of times it's like, well, yeah, I had to double block my opponent's 5/5 with these 2 3/3s because, it was that or chump, and that's clearly better. Yeah, they had the trick and I lost, but there was just no choice there. So looking at the choices, even if the choices ended up being, like, sometimes it will actually not be the most impactful part, but it's still the part you had the most decisions over. I mean, mulliganing, a no-land hand is also pretty impactful to your win percentage, but you clearly don't have a choice there.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that is interesting to be able to look back and find those important moments. And, I think that, part of it is just, if you find yourself pausing at a specific interval there and saying, okay, if I do this, then I could win the game next turn. But if it goes wrong, I can lose. These are earmarks of a decision that's really important and that it might be worth your while to go back and look at. I know that for me, relating this back to poker, there's a lot of decisions that come in poker, and it's the same thing in Magic. In fact, even more so, that are so difficult in the moment that they require you, if you actually want to work through all the factors, to maybe jot them down and kind of get an idea of like, okay, here's option A. These are the things I'm thinking about for it. And here's option B. The problem is that most people can't do that on the fly, right? It's too many factors to juggle for your brain. And, you got to play a game of Magic here. You can't just sit there and start writing stuff down and, doing all this stuff. So what ends up happening is your brain needs shortcuts. It needs the ability to skip over going through every single possible variable and applying it to some formula that you come up with or whatever, and be able to see, here's a shortcut. And, I was talking earlier today about this, in fact, which is that when I was playing poker at first, there used to be certain scenarios. I had memorized most of the basic scenarios that you bump into in poker, right? And, without getting too poker centric, something like somebody has an overpair and I have, or somebody has a pair and I have two cards that are over, bigger than his pair, right? So they've got tens, I've got a pair.
Like physically larger, like some of the cards are bigger than the others?
They're actually all the same size. But, so I've got ace, king, and my opponent has queens, right? And so there's an equity, right? And the equity is, if we were to go all in right here, who would have what percentage of winning? And I went through and roughly memorized some of the scenarios that pop up all the time. But what was really interesting for me was there's some more complex scenarios that come back after the flop, after the first three cards come out. And some of them are not intuitive. And so for me, I would jot down the notes in my phone while I was playing, because again, I didn't have the ability to run this through in my head. It's just too much complex math. So when I got home, I would plug it into my computer. I had a program that I could plug in all these variables and all these things, and it would spit out this percentage number of how often do you win this hand. And after doing that, I found that there were certain spots where my intuition told me that I had, let's say, 20% chance to win from there. But the reality is it was like in the high 30s. It was like 35, 36, 37. And that happened a few times where I started to memorize, okay, when I have this scenario, my brain is going to tell me that I don't have a very good chance to win. But the fact is, it's actually better. And, I think that while this isn't directly applicable to Magic, I think that the idea is where you might not be able to figure out exactly what type of things you're playing around or what could possibly go wrong in a given scenario. But if you get done with your game and you remember what the setup was, you actually can go back and say, okay, what are the cards my opponent could have had that would punish me here? Creatures with haste, things that steal my creatures, things that, kill two of my creatures or more. These are all things that I was afraid of. Go look in the set and just scroll through it, of the red and black cards, let's say if your opponent was red-black, and figure out which ones they could have possibly had. Then you can start narrowing it down a little further by thinking, well, did I pass any of these in the draft? Where was this person relative to me? So they probably got that, whatever, that act of treason that I passed. They might have it. Also, did I see this card from my opponent in an earlier game? All of these bump the likelihood. Now, I think Magic's too complex to use this in the same way that I used to for poker, but I do think you can get closer than it appears at first blush. And I think it's an interesting exercise to go back and try it anyway, just because it gets your brain thinking in terms of concrete realities as opposed to, the random haste creature that doesn't even exist in the set that you played around, right? And because, that is a mistake that you'll see from a lot of people is they get scared and they'll be like, I'm not going to attack with all my creatures because what if they have something? And, I do feel like if you're willing to put in the extra work, now you don't do this every time. You do this so that your brain can start to figure it out and figure out shortcuts that you can actually use in the thing where maybe the thing that you played around, the something, doesn't exist. Or there's not as many somethings as you thought. Or, your opponent was top decking. What are the chances that they rip that something that you haven't seen in the game that beats you? And you were scared that they would, so you didn't attack and you took conservative line. But if you really look back, you're like, God, the chances, I don't need a percentage. I just know that they have to draw it off the top of their deck, and it has to be this one type of card, and there's only one of those in this set, and I didn't even see it from them, so the chances they had it were just extremely low, so I should have definitely attacked. And, I think that you can start to logic through some of those things if you're willing to put in the extra work. All right, thanks, Brian, for the question, and we're going to move on now. We're going to do a couple of fun things for this show. It's going to be a little more laid back, Luis. We're kind of in chill mode here. You and I are both getting ready to go to do coverage at the World Championship, and we're not the only ones. We've got a special guest with us. He's actually sitting right next to me on the couch here in Seattle, all the way from England. It's Pro Tour commentator Tim Willoughby. Tim, welcome.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you on. We're going to have a little discussion with you about kind of a cool and radical technique that you use when a set first comes out, and we're going to kind of dive into that. But what we thought we would do at the beginning here, Tim, is we're going to use you. I'm sorry, I know it's a little harsh, but Luis and I have been toying around with the idea, and we've even done it a couple of times in the distant past on the show, of doing crack-a-packs that go a little bit deeper than pack one, pick one. I think people have asked for that before as well. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to go 4 picks deep into this one. But the problem with that is that we need somebody opening up packs and being, the other 3 people at the table or the other 4 people at the table. And when it's Luis and I, it gets way too cumbersome, and also it gets difficult for us to separate out what we know is coming. We want to try to keep it bias free if we can, and sometimes your human brain will just tell you, oh, take the red card because you're going to get a sweet red card next. But Tim is sitting over here, and he's actually acting as those other players. So what we're going to do is we're going to crack a pack here. We're going to do a pack one, pick one. And then Tim is going to pass us packs, and we're gonna go through that, and Luis and I are gonna kind of navigate through these first few picks, and we're gonna tell you what we would take, based on the information we have, and hopefully it's useful for you at home to get a little bit more in depth of a crack-a-pack. So Luis, are you ready for this first one?
Oh yeah, I do have to say before we start that Tim is the person who I think has my favorite line I've ever heard in coverage.
Oh, what was it?
So, Tim and, his co-commentator were in the booth, and the person who's doing commentary with was like, wow, it's not often that you see an Elspeth with 9 counters on it. Tim's like, well, it's not often you see a 6-sided die with 9 counters on it either. Because it was just a 6 that was upside down.
What a dagger.
Very clearly a 6. That was just incredible. So
that's amazing.
I mean, sometimes you just need to get in there before every single person in the chat says it anyway, right?
Well, yeah, you're gonna get yelled at by the chat already there, so I don't think that there was much throwing under the bus. I just think that was just an amazing line, and as someone who appreciates that thing, I cannot blame you for not passing up on it.
A little troll equity there for Tim. All right, well, let's dive into this first pack. This one comes from listener Lee. Met Lee in Detroit. Thank you for the pack, Lee. We're opening up quite a few listener packs here. There's going to be whoever wins the next I was going to say this is getting
sweetening the pot.
Yeah.
I actually have a question. So I still have a Modern Masters pack given to me by Sam at GP Charlotte. By the time we got back, we were done with Modern Masters. So what am I supposed to do with this Modern Masters pack?
I don't know, man. I have one too.
There's Modern Masters happening at the World Championship. It's still kind of vaguely relevant, right?
We could open it.
It is online. I guess we could do a Modern Masters crack-a-pack.
All right, we'll make that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do 2 of these in-depth crack-a-packs, and then we'll do the Modern Masters one, and you can bring it, and I'll put it in the pile and ship it, unless it's a Tarmogoyf, in which case I'll replace it with my pile of junk letters from Modern Masters.
You standard operating procedure. Look, LR is a business.
Crack-a-palooza.
Yeah. All right, so here's our pack one, pick one, Luis. First card is Timberpack Wolf.
I like Timberpack Wolf. It's not the kind of card I would take super early, but it's a good 2-drop as far as 2-drops go.
Our next card is a Deadbridge Shaman. Card you and I have both been pretty okay with. I don't cut it from the decks that I have that are plain black, and the card's performed well for me.
It's a solid 2 for 1, more like 1.5 for 1, because your opponent tends to, well, of course they're going to discard their worst card. They're also going to get to control the trigger a little bit, but That being said, it also has some elf synergies too. So overall, yeah, this is a card I never cut. I actually am a little less excited about it than I was at first, but it's still a perfectly acceptable card.
Yeah. Healing Hands, your favorite card, Luis, from the set.
Yeah, this one didn't really pan out so well. I'm going to go ahead and take a pass on this.
Imprint Tactician is next. We had this last week in our pack. We've both come down on, okay, Imprint Tactician. If I'm in white, I got a bunch of 2-drops. I'm down to play an Imprint Tactician, and I'm not even that sad about it at this point.
Yeah, I think Imprint Tactician has moved up in my pick order. Not enough to take it over Timberpack Wolf, but, it's a good card.
Yeah. Smash to Smithereens is next. That's a sideboard card. Stratus Walk, it keeps trolling you, Luis. But at any rate, not a first pick here. One of the best commons in the set. This is Topin Freeblade, Luis.
Topin Freeblade is quite good. This is the leader of this pack so far, just because it's a 2-drop that also just levels up.
Yeah. Interestingly, too, when I think of Magic Origins, I think of Topin Freeblade. I think it's sort of the poster child for the whole set.
Yeah, it's the loudest common, renowned creature. So
right, and it's the card that I fear. Yeah, it's like whenever I look at a deck, I say, yeah, but can it beat a turn 2 Topin Freeblade because somebody has that? They might even have multiples. Next is Claustrophobia. Where are you at on Claustrophobia? Still good?
I like Claustrophobia. I think it's worse than Void Mage Separatist, but otherwise it's pretty good.
Or Separatist Void Mage. Guardians of Meletis.
Guardians of Meletis is fine.
It's fine.
It's a card you want in a defensive deck. You need a specific reason to be playing it, though. You should not put Guardians in a random deck, and as such, cards like that are not cards you tend to want to first pick.
Sam Pardee had 3 of those on the table while Ifro was missing land drops.
Oh, I was there.
Yeah, you had a good seat for that one.
I don't know if I call it a good seed.
He had 18 toughness off of the Guardians, and then I think the 1/4.
Yeah,
something like 22 toughness on the battlefield. Next is Elemental Bond. This is our first uncommon, and I'm putting it in the graveyard of basically unplayable build around me uncommons that just make me sad. Like, this is the kind of card that, I love cards like this when I get to draft number 40 and I want to try to go deep, and Elemental Bond just didn't pay us back. It's just not good enough. Sad face. Oh, here's one. Ooh, I'm really curious about this one. It's another white one. This is Anointer of Champions, Luis.
This got upgraded from common to uncommon. It was when it was called Infantry Veteran. It was a common back in like M11. And Anointer is very good. In fact, it's good enough I could see just taking it over Topin Freeblade.
Yeah, it is. Like, I had a tough choice. Actually, you know where it was? It was on one of my latest videos for Channel Fireball, one of my draft videos. And I was already in white. This wasn't pack 1, pick 1. And I had the choice between an Anointer of Champions and a Suppression Bonds. And it was funny because somebody pointed me to the pick after and they said, well, this must have been a tough pick, but I didn't know what they were talking about. So I just hit play on the thing and it was that pick. And God, it was a tough pick. I didn't really have much removal at the time. And so I took the Suppression Bonds, but like, you could just hear it in my...
generally going to be the safer pick.
Yeah, and that's what I said. But you could just hear it in my voice that I'm just like, God, am I making a mistake here? Like, I took the solid play, right? Like, it's just the card that's going to be... Well, it's just more solid, right? It's going to be more consistently a performer because, it is easy to forget that Anointer of Champions when you're behind is completely miserable, right? I mean, it is just not a card that you want to play in any capacity. But my God, the games when you play turn 1 Anointer of Champions is absurd. I mean, it's just one of the best performers. It just means that you creatures just never get blocked for the first, 100 turns of the game, and the game ends up over. You like, which would you take out of the two?
I would take Anointer here.
Okay. I think I still take Freeblade because I just prefer these cards that are more middle ground, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Freeblade is a safer pick. Maybe pick 1, pack 1, you should be taking a Freeblade. If you end up aggressive, I think you're going to want Anointer, and white does tend to end up aggressive, but it is safer to take the Freeblade. I will give you that.
Slightly worse 1/1 for 1 here. It's Gnarl Root Trapper, the elf that you can tap and pay a life to add green, but only cast it to cast an elf creature spell. Or you can give target attacking elf Death Touch if you tap it. I've never played this card, Luis. I somehow just never had the occasion.
Well, it's a trap. Oh, technically it's a trapper, but yeah, it is not a card you should be playing unless you're really heavy elves. And here's the same old tired refrain. It's that these build-around decks just don't really get there in this format.
Yeah, sad face. We have a good rare. Harbinger of the Tides. This is the blue 2/2, and when it enters a battlefield, you may return target tapped creature an opponent controls to their hand, and if you pay 2 extra colorless, you can play it at instant speed as if it had flash. Or it has flash.
Isn't it Harbinger?
It is not Harbinger. It is not Harbinger. It is Harbinger of the Tides. And I love this card. I've had a chance to play it probably 2 or 3 times in the format, which is, probably more than you should. And anyway, the thing has been a serious performer. Really good card.
Well, it's a vintage, legacy, and modern standout. So how could it not be?
There you go. Is it better than Taupe Freeblade? It's in a definitely worse color.
Yeah, I think
it's double blue.
I think it's enough better that I would still take the Harbinger.
Is that funny, Tim?
It's funny, strange. I'm not sure how funny haha it is.
We have a foil. It's a rare.
Ooh, is it foiled again?
We are foiled again, unfortunately. It's Orbs of Warding. 5 colorless for an artifact. You have hexproof. If a creature would deal damage to you, prevent 1 of that damage. So,
this is a fine card in some constructed sideboards. It's not really a card I want in my deck in limited. I suppose you could side it in against an army of Thopters, but yeah, there's no way I'm taking this over a Harbinger.
Right. Okay, so you and I had it narrowed down to Harbinger, and then you kind of like the Anointer, I kind of like the Freeblade, but we were both close on that. But we agree, right, that the Harbinger just trumps the other two?
I think so.
I think so too. And I'm not that afraid to be in blue in this format either. So I think I'm good with taking Harbinger on our pack 1 pick 1. Are you on board?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, it is a worse color, but it is definitely the most powerful card.
All right, so we take Harbinger. Now, Tim, you've had a chance to go through this pack, and you took a card out of it.
I did.
Did you take something sweet? Just give us a little hint.
I took something solid.
Okay, took a solid pick. All right, so I'm looking through, Luis, and the first thing I'm doing is I'm looking through to see what the rarity of the card that Tim took.
Tim's pretty lucky, but he did say solid, so I'm going to go with he took a common.
He took an uncommon.
Oh, okay.
And so I'll go through the rest of the pack as we lead up. I'll go a little quicker here, just because now we're starting to narrow it down to other blue cards take precedent, and then also what are the signals. Now, I want to put a little 20-second timeout here, though, and remember that, like we talked about last week, any signals we get at this point aren't signals that we can take as gospel, right? They are going to be data points that we're going to add up as we go through the next 2 to 3 packs here and start to figure out where Tim's at maybe and how this draft is forming. If we get a really good any color card here, it doesn't mean that Tim's not in that color for the most part. Now, the fact that he took an uncommon can change that a little bit, but for the most part, pretty much anything goes. So we've got an Act of Treason. Not really on my radar here. Yeah. A Mighty Leap, same thing. Macabre Waltz. Yeah. Timberpack Wolf. Now, we just passed one, but it's not really that exciting either.
Yeah, I don't hate blue-green, though. I did not like it for a while, but I've drafted it a few more times since then, and yeah, if the cards are there, if both colors are open, then you can actually get a pretty good little tempo deck going. Not saying I'm jumping at the chance to take a Timberpack Wolf here, but I wouldn't outright dismiss it.
Yeah, it did really well in the Magic Online data that we got for the Pro Tour. Blue-green was the best performing deck from that, if I recall correctly.
My guess is that it's because you don't end up blue-green unless you have a good reason to do so.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It might have a smaller sample size, but yeah, I mean, it doing well does mean something.
By the way, this pack was from Vinny DeLuca. Thanks, Vinny. Stratus Walk, no. Titan Strength, still no. Now, here's an interesting one. Here's a Read the Bones. Blue-black.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the blue-black control decks. I think that you need a stronger reason to go into those colors, like starting with a couple removal spells or better yet, like a Languish. Taking Harbinger, which is good in a tempo deck, and then a Read the Bones is not really my idea of embarking on a fantastic journey.
What would you say your ideal color pairing is for our Pack 1 Pick 1 Harbinger of the Tides?
Blue-white is pretty close to the top of my list. It's a good aggressive deck, and blue and white tend to work together pretty well. Blue-red is not that bad either.
Okay. Fairy Miscreant is next.
It's also not a coincidence that white and red are the two best colors. So
I'm vetoing Fairy Miscreant. Nissa's Pilgrimage. No. Enlightened Aesthetic.
No, that's just a sideboard card.
Yeah. Ooh. Anointer of Champions.
All right. I mean,
so
it's relevant that you did pass 2 white cards here, but not so relevant that I wouldn't just take a white card if it's the best card, which so far it is.
Which so far definitely is. Yeah, I like that. All right. Another uncommon, a solid one as well. It's Dwynen's Elite. That's the 2/2 for 2, and when it enters the battlefield, if you control another elf, you get a 1/1 elf.
Is it if you control another elf or merfolk?
It's just another elf.
Oh, it's just elves.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I just double checked Harbinger, and it is Merfolk Wisdom.
Yeah.
So.
I would take Anointer still over the Elite, even though I would too. Elite's a fine card to take early.
Yeah, I think that card's good. Our rare is a disappointment. It's Jace's Sanctum, which makes your instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast. It's an enchantment, blah, blah, blah. It's not what we're going to be taking here. Even though it's a blue rare, which, it would have been exciting if it was something great, but instead it's not. So I think that you and I are on the same page, and we want to take Anointer of Champions here, right?
I believe so. I think starting with Harbinger into Anointer is very reasonable.
Just throwing a bunch of different looks at us here. All right, Tim, what's on this next pack? Or should we be excited about this one?
I wasn't super excited about this pack.
All right. This one comes from Jim. Thank you, Jim. We like you. All right. So I'm once again going to kind of thumb to the back of the pack here to see what the rarity situation is. And I can tell you that all 3 uncommons are here, and the rare's gone. So that means that a rare and a common have been picked out of this pack. Rock Smallers.
I like Rock Smallers.
Me too.
They're pretty big. And at this point, I don't consider us to be in blue or white necessarily. If Rock Smallers is the best card, we're going to take the Rock Smallers.
Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. And this goes, I think this is a good opportunity for us to teach, at least how I draft, and I think how you do too, which is, I really am willing to stay very open in the first few packs. Like, I just view them as me kind of casting my fishing line out and just seeing if anything nibbles. I would love to play that Harbinger, but like, if we don't, I'm totally fine with not playing it. Like, that is not something that I'm married to at this point. And I think that's one of the big mistakes that you see from newer drafters, and even sometimes experienced drafters, is that they will just we know we're blue. We don't know that. If we see no good blue cards flowing here, we can absolutely ditch that card. We've already got an Anointer of Champions. We can go into green-white with the Rock Smallers here, or whatever direction we want. Macabre Waltz is next. Not really on my radar at this point in the pack. Another Act of Treason. All right, well, here's a Celestial Flare. That's a pretty good one.
I don't love Celestial Flare, especially with a double blue card. Again, we're not necessarily in blue, but if you do have to look at your mana symbols, even of cards you might play.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I like it, but, well, yeah. Stratuswalk? Nope.
Even if I knew we were in blue, I wouldn't go out of my way to take Stratuswalk.
Right. Vastwood Gorger is next, not nearly as good as Rock Smallers. Heavy Infantry, that's the 3/4 for 5 that taps a creature when it enters the battlefield. That's very mediocre here. Like, I would take Celestial Flare over it, even with the ugly mana cost.
For sure.
Bonded Construct, whatever.
We're not that aggressive, not yet.
Not that, and it also is kind of a non-bow with Anointer. Pricklebore.
So I like Pricklebore more than any other card we've seen so far. I would be pretty unhappy to be third picking a Pricklebore when I have a blue and a white card. But
do you like it better than Rock Smallers here? I like Rock Smallers as a card better, but there are color considerations here.
I like Pricklebore as the color better, but
yeah,
actually, I probably would still take the Rock Smallers.
I think I would too. Yeah. All right. Well, we've got a red uncommon. Stirruper Aether Grid, though. God, the graveyard of unplayable build around me uncommons grows larger. Yeah. All right, now here's a nice one. Citadel Castellan.
So now this is a reason to take a green card. It's funny that because even though taking a gold card is a cost, the cost is a little lessened here because we already have a white card, so taking another white card isn't that bad. It does obviously mean that we're less likely to play the Harbinger, but I wouldn't mind the Castellan. I think it's the best card to take so far.
I think so too. And now this is interesting, Luis. We've got a real monkey wrench thrown in here. Thopter Engineer. So that's the 2 in a red 1/3 that makes a Thopter and also gives your artifact creatures haste, which has been a solid performer for me for the whole duration. Every time I've had Thopter Engineer, I've thought this card absolutely pulled its weight. It does some weird things too by giving your artifact creatures haste. Doesn't come up all the time. I mean, the one that it makes it does, but beyond that, sometimes it just doesn't do anything else along those lines. But God, it sometimes, you get lucky, you get a Whirler Rogue or something like that, and now you're attacking in the air with a lot more, and it can really kind of skew things. And also, I kind of like it feels like a Skies type card where it's a 1/3 blocker on the ground, but also creates a flying attacker, and that's just sort of natively good to this type of strategy. Wow, Thopter Engineer or Citadel Castellan, that is really close for me.
If it was just, this is why I think it's kind of cool to do these like slightly deeper crack-up packs, because if it was pack 1, I think we'd both just be saying take the Thopter Engineer.
Totally.
But given we already have a white and a blue card, either of these cards means that we're abandoning one of the cards. Yes. Thopter Engineer does let us pair with either of the 2 cards we just drafted, so you can either end up in white-red or blue-red, or of course still white-blue, but the Citadel Castellan, it doesn't. We still have to abandon the Harbinger, but we don't have to abandon the Anointer if we end up in green-white. So the gold card is not actually that much more restrictive than the monocolor card because it's a monocolor in a different color than what we already have.
Exactly.
I think I would take the Castellan here.
I would too.
It's also a pretty good signal. Every person passing to you, even if they're the same person multiple times, in this particular case.
Tim, Tom.
Every person passing to you knows that they passed that card and it's going to be one of the first cards taken. So it does give you a slightly more of an incentive to take it 3rd or 4th because you know that the people have seen it. Whereas if you took it first, they have no idea and they're more likely to go into those colors.
Right. Because, and the reason Luis is saying that is because, if the people to our right, are passing a Citadel Castellan, then they're not fancying themselves to be in green-white. And that means that, we might get another Citadel Castellan if one gets opened at the table, and the green and or white cards, could be open. Now, somebody could be in green and somebody could be in white. They just don't have to be in green-white, so it doesn't always work out, but it is at least, a data point that points us in that direction. I like it too. I mean, 3rd pick Thopter Engineer is definitely an eyebrow raiser for me. That's a card you could first pick and not be crushed about. I don't know that it's the ideal first pick, but, you could first pick that and be like, whatever. I would take the Castellan, though, just because I think it works fantastic with the Anointer of Champions. And I also just think it's a more powerful card than the Engineer overall. Like, you get this thing down, and it asks a very potent, very urgent question of your opponent, and if they can't answer it, it completely runs them over. And I respect that about the Castellan. She's just a badass. So why don't we take that?
Seems like a plan.
All right, so we took that. Tim, how many more packs do we have now?
This is our last pack in this first run. Okay. And it was easily the most powerful pack of the ones that I opened.
Oh, interesting. And by the way, we're going to have Tim tell us the stuff that he opened when he took up stream and give us a little recap. And I think, Luis, it would be interesting for us to try to guess as well what, let's say Tim is in, the seat directly to our right, to just get a feel for out of these first packs. It takes a little more to get a real opinion, but we can throw out a guess.
Yeah, this is the Tim seat. This was the Obi seat. If we've got Tim, Will, and Obi, this is the Obi seat, and it's by far the most difficult pack.
Yeah, because this one was opened up fairly far away from us. All right, so once again, I'm going to look back at the uncommon/rare and see what we've got here. And wow, we have all 3 uncommons here, Luis. Holy crap. Yeah, this is a real pack. All right. Let's jump in. Our first common is Leaf Gilder.
All right. Well, so, Leaf Gilder's pretty good. And this is the sort of thing where I'm already happy because a 4th pick Leaf Gilder is a decent sign. It's one of the better green commons, if not the best. And it means that we're at least getting a good card 4th pick because Leaf Gilder's not only an acceptable 4th pick by itself, it also is a good sign. So, all right, we're going well. We're starting well, at least.
Yeah, and it is funny because obviously the order that the cards get handed to you is completely irrelevant. but it has this psychological impact of, okay, we're good. Now our question isn't, please let us get a good card for our deck. It's now you got to beat Leaf Gilder, right? And like, that's actually pretty tough. The card's decent. Next is Charging Griffin.
All right. This is another good card. I like Leaf Gilder more than Charging Griffin in the position we're in here because we've got, see, the order you get the packs also really matters here too. I feel like the green signal is better because even though we got an Anointer second, we got a white-green gold card third and a Leaf Gilder fourth, which is, I think, a stronger signal than Anointer second, Charging Griffin fourth.
Yeah, absolutely. I also like...
Oh, and a Rock Smaller in the previous pack.
In the previous
very,
pack.
Very relevant.
Yeah. I like taking a Leaf Gilder over the Charging Griffin here as well. I think that there are decks where that wouldn't be the case, but, 2 drops are at a premium. That's the kind of card you want to have here. And, they work well as trading off for... whatever 2-drops, aggressive 2-drops your opponents are playing or powering out something bigger on your end. Macabre Waltz is next. No. Another Active Treason. God, another Celestial Flare.
All right, well.
I still like the Gilder better.
I like Charging Griffin more than Celestial Flare too in this.
Okay.
In what we have so far.
It's pretty down on our list. But still, it's interesting that it's here. Artificer's Epiphany. No. Here's a Might of the Masses.
I like Might of the Masses. The fact that it only costs 1 makes it pretty good in terms of mana efficiency. It's still not as good as Leaf Gilder, though.
No, and we will hope to pick up 1 or 2 of those for a deck like this. It's just not here. Bellows Lizard. He looks happy. He should be sad. And that gets us to our uncommons. Our first one is Magmatic Insight, which I have yet to cast in the format, and I feel just fine about that.
Well, I think the card's a little better than that, but I'm clearly not taking it here.
Right. What the hell? There's another Anointer of Champions.
All right. That's a thing.
That's got to be better than the Leaf Gilder,
Oh,
right?
yeah. Especially since white-green tends to be quite aggressive and have a lot of renowned creatures, so Anointer is just perfect in that deck.
I think so, too. The other thing that I'm thinking about here, Luis, like when comparing these two cards, is I will, maybe even more than a tiebreaker, favor the white cards in this scenario, because I feel like, green is open, but white is clearly open, too. But ultimately, I feel like the fight for the white cards is going to be fiercer than the fight for the green cards at most tables, so I will default to the white card if they're even close. And this one, I think, is just better anyway. One more uncommon, Bounding Krasis.
Another really good one. If we were to go into blue-green, and we go with the Harbinger, this card obviously quite good, but I do think that I would rather take an Anointer here. First of all, it lets you keep playing the Citadel Castellan. It also Anointer, I think. Well, I guess if you don't assume casting them is not a problem, the Krasis is probably a little better, but Anointer is quite good.
Now, this is a little... So before we get to what Tim opened up here and kind of see how the thing went, I got 2 things I want to address. 1, what color do we think Tim's in? And 2, our picks to recap are Harbinger of the Tides, Anointer of Champions, Citadel Castellan, Anointer of Champions. One thing to absolutely keep in mind here is that we could very easily still just be blue-white, right? Like if we get past, back-to-back
Separatist
Void Mages or something, like, sorry, Citadel Castellan, you had a good run, but you're out, and all of a sudden we're back in business. So, it is really important. I see people make this mistake a lot, and it's similar to the pack one, pick one thing, but now they'll take the Castellan and be like, okay, fine, we're green-white. It shouldn't be flip like a black and white switch in your head where you're just like, we are this, no, now we are this, now we are this. At any point, you should be able to step back, take a snapshot of your deck and say, you know what? I could be blue-white easily. Like, the point we're at here is we're pretty solidly in white, and we could either have Citadel Castellan or Harbinger of the Tides, and it depends on what's around those cards based on what we want to pick. So I want you guys to keep that in mind at home. Now, with that being said, let's try to figure out what we think Tim is in. And Tim, you're sitting directly to our right.
Sure.
What did you name your other alter egos?
So we got Tim, we got Will, and we got Obi.
I assume it's just some British thing.
Yeah, it's some British thing. Yeah, I don't know what an Obi is.
So I don't know exactly who is drafting black, but one of these people is drafting black, and I would actually guess it's Tim because we've seen 0 playable black cards.
Yeah.
That's kind of tough to do. We saw Read the Bones, I guess, was the only the closest.
Yeah, I agree.
Red also seems like it's getting quite cut. So
now,
yeah.
An interesting question, though, Luis, is so out of pack one, pick one, there was a common missing. Is that right?
Uncommon missing.
Sorry, an uncommon missing. So what's a black? Is it Eye Blight Massacre that comes to mind for uncommon black cards? Oh no, it's Cruel Revival.
It could be. It doesn't. It's not a guarantee there's a black card in that pack. Tim could have just taken a non-black card, but then taken black cards out of the next 2 packs.
True.
So I think that black and red are the 2 colors we've seen the least of. We've seen it more white, blue, and green. Certainly a lot of white and green, but I guess we didn't actually see too many blue cards get past. The Bound and Crisis was just about it. So
yeah, I would think that he's blue-black. I think he went Cruel Revival into some type of, what was the next card? What was the next rarity? It was
There was a rare and a common gone.
It was a rare.
There was a rare and a common gone.
A rare and a common gone. So I'm going to assume that the other person. So I think it was a Separatist. I think it was a Void Mage. That's my prediction.
I'm not confident I predict individual cards. I just
I know, but I am.
I just think that red and black got the most cut, followed by blue.
Okay, I think blue and black. All right, Tim, break it down for us. What did you open?
Tim's deck. He did take Cruel Revival first.
Oh,
nailed it.
Confidence.
By looking at the pack.
No, I can't. I didn't.
No,
I
he can't see from
now,
here.
but I couldn't see it from where.
All right, I will believe Tim. Okay.
Yeah. So took Cruel Revival first. Like the only real consideration was just, do I really want to be in black? But to be perfectly honest, like if I wasn't taking a Cruel Revival, we're talking about a like not super exciting creature. And I just like starting with a solid removal spell just felt like a good place to begin. Then got past a Reeve Soul and got to follow it up third with an Antuco Husk.
Oh, nice.
So like staying pretty committed to black, probably a little bit more committed than was entirely necessary, but given how well the Husk works with the Cruel Revival, it felt like a nice, safe place to be able to move around a little bit, depending on how the draft went.
And you successfully cut black, as in, we weren't drafting black, and the person on our left probably wasn't. They may have first picked a black card, but they wouldn't have taken any other black card, and then the person on their left maybe
they would have got to read
cards,
the bones. They got a third pick, read the bones, but that's nothing.
Yeah,
that's
not
nothing
a huge
remarkable.
signal.
Right.
So I think that Tim is set up pretty well, presumably for pack 2, depending on what else happens.
That's a great point, Luis, and it shows that if you do have the option of staking your claim hard enough, right? You don't want to be reckless. If there's a really great card in another color, go for it. But there is upside to, defaulting back to one color for the first few picks and really trying to cut the people. Like, cause look at us. I mean, we're nowhere near black, right? I mean, that's probably last on our list. In fact, it was based on our discussion, which was just that we assumed that you, or maybe the person to your right, is in black and we're just nowhere near it. And that's a bonus for you. I mean, that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
So what about, Will?
So Will got a bit attracted to the various rares that were knocking about. So
that happens. That happens.
He opened and took Guildleaf Winnower.
Oh, jeez.
Right. So like good solid body / removal spell that's just going to do lots of good things, and then got past a Willbreaker.
Okay.
Now I'm not super high on Willbreaker in general, but I quite like starting out a draft with it if there's not too much else in the pack, just because you have time to get things to enable it.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, the approach you took here, Tim, is you see it all the time.
Yeah.
People are just like, oh, that's a rare, I'll take that. Even if it's like, And
then Obi, so his was the pack that you saw last that had lots of great cards in. He actually faced the exact same question that you had at the start of the draft of Anointer Champions or Topen Freeblade. He went with Topen Freeblade rather than the Anointer because he felt like the 2-drop was just sort of a good solid first pick for a draft.
Okay. And then we didn't get any more picks to that person.
We got no more picks for that person because he was the one that was furthest away.
Okay. Cool.
But
so
the weird thing was that red in general in the packs was just weak. It wasn't that it was being cut at all.
Nobody was cutting red. There just weren't red cards.
Correct.
Well, that's another important, going back to what we talked about at the beginning of it about using these, instead of thinking in terms of signals as absolutes, using them as data points, it is so easy to forget that sometimes weird things happen. Sometimes people change their mind. Sometimes people get a card that they take as a signal and they move in hard, way harder than they should be on a color. And sometimes there's just not cards opened in that color. I can't tell you how many times I've moved in on a color late-ish in pack 1, right? I got some good cards, and I thought, just based on the way that this pack has gone, I think that this is the most open color. And then, felt like it was pretty open. And then fast forwarding to pack 3, that's where I'm supposed to get paid off, right? That's the pack where I'm supposed to get a bunch of good cards because they were flowing in the earlier pack, and then they don't. And I'm just thinking to myself, I knew red was totally open from this side, and now it's not. So either somebody moved in, which does happen occasionally, or there just wasn't cards. And then 6 pick rolls around, and there's your Thopter Engineer sitting there. And you're like, there just wasn't a lot of red cards opened in these packs. And that does happen. That is a thing that you have to account for. And it might make you feel like you made a mistake from your switch, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes the cards just aren't there in the packs. Okay, let's do another one. This is fun. I kind of like this.
Yeah, and I like that, even though we first pick a blue card, this shows how quickly you can kind of get off it. Or, depending on how the packs went, maybe get back on. We'll see. I think that you shouldn't think of, at any given point in the draft, or at least in the first pack, you're not, I'm blue-white or I'm white-green or whatever. It's just these probability fields where, given the 4 cards we had, 2 Anointers, Citadel Castellans, and the Harbinger, we're most likely to be white of all the colors. And we're slightly more likely to be green, or a decent amount more likely to be green than blue because green seemed more open. But we could easily switch out of any of those colors. We could end up even in black or red if the right cards show up. Those probabilities are smaller than all the other 3 colors. It goes, white, then green, then blue, then a pretty big drop between black and red. But at no point are we locked in until sometime in the second pack, pretty much.
Right. All right. Well, that last pack, by the way, was from Zach. Thank you, Zach. And we're going to crack this next one. Tim, you can go ahead and crack alongside me. These are actually both from Brian. 2 different Brians. But thank you, Brian. So Tim, Will, and Obi are over there starting their draft off. And in the meantime, Luis and I are going to be cracking our first pack. So let's see what happens here. Our first card out is an Aven Battle Priest, the 3/3 for 6. It gains you 3 life, and it's got flying. No.
Battle Priest does some work. That card is better than it looks. I'm not in love with it, but it definitely can shut down aggressive decks.
I bring it in out of the sideboard.
Yeah. That is the most likely scenario, but I think that you should be aware of it being, a good option.
Yeah. Eyebite Assassin is next. Card's fine. Yeah,
Eyebite Assassin is a fine card.
It's fine. Hitchclaw Recluse. Sure.
Yeah. The best way this was described by someone on Twitter was, I think I already mentioned this, is a character in a bad detective novel.
Hitchclaw Recluse?
Yeah.
Next is Negate.
Straight up sideboard card, but a good one at that.
Yep. Another sideboard card here, Enlightened Ascetic. Wow, this pack is just crap. All right, well, here's at least a playable Firefiend Elemental. Not a particularly good card, though. I've been running in my red decks and been fine with it, though.
Firefiend Elemental is a fine card. When it gets a hit in, it feels great. You're like, man, this card's awesome.
Yeah.
4 mana, 4/3 that, dealt 3 to my opponent. But when they have a 2/2 up, you're like, God, this card is so bad.
Yeah, this card's so bad. And it's funny because it, there's actually not much haste in this format. You don't see a ton of it. And Firefiend Elemental still catches people off guard where they think that you're racing, and then you go turn 4, Firefiend Elemental hit you with my other guys, and it's like, ugh. It can snowball, but overall, yeah, it usually just ends up getting traded out for something lesser. Rabid Bloodsucker, the 3/2 flying, and each player loses 2 life when it enters the battlefield. It costs 5 mana, 4 and a black. I'm still, this is like in the DD plus range for me. It's a card I'll play occasionally, but I'm not really looking to go out of my way for it. Scrapskin Drake is next. Whatever.
Yeah,
it's kind of lost.
Yeah, there's not enough support for Scrapskin Drake to be consistently good. There are some decks that the Drake is good in. You end up with like Thunderclap Wyvern or what have you. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it's just not a card that really fits all that well.
Yeah. The problem, of course, being that most of the blue decks want to slow things down or be like a tempo deck or something. And the Drake just isn't a great fit for that. When you need to block and you play your turn 3 Scrapskin Drake, you're pretty sad. And it can be pretty bad. As an attacker, it's still just okay. Like hitting for 2 in the air is nothing amazing. Reclaim. Go away. All right, uncommons. Psychic Rebuttal.
Oh, this pack is
a real
impressively
juicer here.
bad.
Yeah.
This is we haven't seen the rest of the pack, so there's a good chance we get an actual decent card because just a rare plus 2 uncommons is a pretty good, roll of the dice. Mm-hmm. What this pack is so bad for are the people to our left. This is not the pack you want to see third pick was just no playables in.
Yeah, there's just like, there's nothing. I mean, right now, second pick is like, let's see if it gets any better. Rune Servitor.
All right, it's a 2-drop.
We found our winner. Welcome to the team, Artifact Creature Construct. God, this pack is horrible. Zendikar's Royal is our last uncommon.
Okay, well, we're hoping for a rare here.
Well, we've got a foil common.
Well, that helps.
It will not save the day. It's a Caustic Caterpillar. This is just one of the worst packs. Oh, but our rare is sweet. It's Guiltleaf Winnower.
All right, well, we did it. This is the perfect pack. We get to pick a Guiltleaf Winnower and just pass a bunch of garbage.
Wow. Like, hold on a second. We're going to put ourselves in whoever's seat on our left real quick. They get past Caustic Caterpillar, Zendikar's Royal, Rune Servitor, Psychic Rebuttal, Reclaim Drake, Bloodsucker, Firefiend Elemental, which has to be on the short list here, Enlightened Ascetic Negate, Recluse, Eyeblight Assassin, and then the Battle Priest. I guess they take an Eyeblight Assassin? Maybe a Recluse if you...
Probably Eyeblight Assassin, maybe Recluse if they first picked a green card. Firefiend, I guess. Yeah, these are all cards you want to take 6th.
Wow. All right. Well, you know what? I'm passing this back. Sending it away. I can't stand to look at it.
Burn it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. The Guiltleaf Winnower will also be burned with it. This will not be added to the prize pack. And the foil Caustic Caterpillar. No, of course the Winnower will be in the pack, but Winnower, wow, what an easy pick for us. So that was easy. All right, so Tim's passing us his pack 1, pick 1. And again, I'm going to look to the back here and try to get an idea for what kind of rarity Tim may have taken out of this pack. And it turns out he's taken a common this time. So we'll have a lot less information than last time about what he may have taken. Subterranean Scout is our first card. It's already better than all the cards in our other pack, and it's not even that good. Catacomb Slug, that's the 2/6. God, Auramancer, no. Touch of Moonglove, no. Aspiring Aeronaut, I like this guy.
Did we accidentally get all the unplayable packs?
Maybe, and we seem to have loaded them up because remember our last pack, we were getting like third pick Anointers and stuff. Aspiring Aeronaut is currently my number 1 here. I think the card's very playable. I think it's slightly underrated. I think people, like I've seen it in people's sideboards a bit, and I don't get that. I definitely think it's a card that warrants main deck inclusion, most of the time. Titanic Growth, whatever. All right, here's a card. Claustrophobia.
All right, Claustrophobia is a card.
Yeah, I like that better than the Aeronaut.
So far, it's the leading contender.
Yeah, so our pack would be Guiltleaf Winnower into Claustrophobia. Well, not that sad about that. Mantle of Webs.
No, I've had this card in play before, notably in the finals of the last GP I played in. But
that was a team draft.
That was a team draft where your decks are worse overall, and it was a sideboard decision. I was playing against a red-green deck that had a lot of Thopter tokens and no good way to kill my creatures.
Oh, there you go. Have you seen the flavor text is, why does everything the Golgari touch end up sticky? All right. Up to the listener to decide.
I don't know if that's an appropriate flavor text to read on air, but go on.
Well, hey, they wrote it. Guardians of Meletis is next now. Claustrophobia is better than that. Oh, good. Another Psychic Rebuttal.
All I'm saying is you better watch out when you're casting your Night Snares or whatever. There's so many Psychic Rebuttals floating around.
Fear me. Somberwald Alpha. All right.
Somberwald Alpha is a card.
Yeah, it's a card.
I might actually take it
Winnower into Alpha or Winnower into Claustrophobia better?
I might take it over Claustrophobia because I think they're close enough that an Alpha goes a lot better with Winnower. Because Winnower, kind of gives you a lead into black-green, because of elves. Even without that, though, the Alpha is just quite a good card.
It is very good. I think it performs really well, especially in the type of decks that I've been drafting in the format, which tend to have quite a few creatures. A lot of creatures are on the board, and the Alpha tends to upgrade, your random 2/2s that you were kind of using as your curve type cards. And now it's the middle part of the game, and they're a little bit outclassed, and the Alpha kind of gets them back up to speed. Our last uncommon is Consecrated by Blood. That's a 2 black aura that gives a creature +2/+2 flying and has the ability sacrifice 2 other creatures, regenerate this creature. It's black. Goes with our first pick. I just don't
It's such an aggressive card. Even though it's a really good aggressive card, it's such an aggressive card. I don't really want to take it unless I know I'm beating down, though it's so good in those decks. It's actually deceptively good.
Right. But I actually like these other cards, even though it's black, which is a pretty big tiebreaker for me. I'm just not really that into Consecrated by Blood to take its second pick just because it matches the color of my other pick. It just doesn't hold a high importance for me. Not a Cavs card either. Our rare, Tainted Remedy. Drink this, brother. It will bring you rest. Well, I did that.
All right.
2 in a black enchantment. If an opponent would gain life, that player loses that much life instead. So we're not doing that. It is down to Somber Walled Alpha or Claustrophobia. And I like the alpha here, actually. I kind of want to just thump somebody. I think that sometimes people think that Guiltleaf Winnower is a little bit more of a controlling type card because it can get a 2-for-1 and kill a creature, but that thing is a beater. 4/3 with Menace is a big pain. And if you can back it up with some combat tricks like you can get out of green, for example, in this pack there's a Titanic Growth that we very well may wheel. You know, that thing hits really hard, and you can use it as just a big tempo play on the beatdown. Claustrophobia takes it down a much more controlling route, which it's good in any deck, but I actually like the alpha here. Thoughts,
I agree. I think I would take the alpha. I don't like passing removal spells, but I like alpha in black green in particular, and I think it's just a slightly more powerful card. Maybe it's a little less. It's less flexible because you want to be attacking. Alpha's clearly not good if you're not attacking, but it is more flexible in that it costs a single green instead of double blue. So, yeah.
I think it's close. I could be talked into either, but I would take the alpha here at this point.
Yeah, I would probably also take the alpha. This reminds me of talking with the guys from Team Ultra Pro. Each person had a different mythic uncommon that they would pick much higher than they should, and they knew that was the case.
It's like confessional.
and Paul Rietzel's was Somberwald Alpha, where he just saw that card and was just like always taking it. Patrick Chapin's was like Sphinx's Tutelage. Like I don't remember all of them, but it's just like people had these uncommons they were just like wedded to that they would always take, even though they knew they weren't necessarily as good as they gave them credit for.
Yeah, you and I are wedded to Whirler Rogue, which we know is exactly
that's just
as we
the best
credit for.
Yeah, the best uncommon in the set. One of the best cards overall in the set.
All right, so let's take a look at our third pick here. This one comes from Will, a couple of seats away from us. And as far as rarity check here, we've got 2 uncommons left in the pack and a rare. So there's an uncommon missing and there's a common missing. I will also say there's actually a third uncommon, but it's a foil, so it doesn't actually take the slot. All right, so let's jump in here. First up, we've got a black card, Weight of the Underworld, which is mediocre.
It is mediocre, but
playable.
Yeah, it's not the worst thing in the world.
Right. Infectious Bloodlust is next. No. Eyeblight Assassin. I like that better than Weight here, I think.
Yeah, I would take Eyeblight Assassin over Weight.
Enshrouding Mist, third pick. I guess I wouldn't really...
I mean, I like Enshrouding Mist, but
it's
like not enough better than the cards that we have that it's worth switching in, or like taking a third color for.
Is Titanic Growth better than Eyeblight Assassin in your mind?
I think I'd rather have the Eyeblight Assassin.
Same.
Also, while we're still balancing between colors, I would prioritize black a little higher than green just because black is... The black card we have, the Winnower, is much better.
And it's also a better color.
Yes.
Alchemist's Vial, card that I end up playing a decent amount of the time if my colors get a little muddled. But ideally I don't, right? Like, I think in the perfect world I don't play Alchemist's Vial, but I am definitely not one of the... I am willing to play one of these in my deck and not be that sad about it. I think it's totally fine. Ring Warden Owl is next. Decent little flyer. Bellows Lizard, whatever. Oh god. Our first uncommon's amazing. It's Sky Snare Spider.
All right. Well, I'm glad you took the alpha because that
yes.
goes nicely into Sky Snare Spider. Not that the Spider's much of a beatdown card. It's just a great card, though.
Yeah, I mean, it beats down pretty hard. Ooh. Oh, this is a little curveball here, Luis. So, our next uncommon is Shaman of the Pack.
All right.
Now, this is the 3/2 for 1 black-green, and it's an elf, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to the number of elves you control. Now, we were talking earlier about how these decks kind of don't usually work out. And Shaman of the Pack definitely is a card that you can just play on its own, and when it does its thing, it can be pretty good. But the problem I see here is that Sky Snare Spider's power level is just so much higher that I don't think we can justify taking Shaman, even if we've got a Guiltleaf Winnower and might get back an Eyeblight Assassin or whatever. But what about us potentially wheeling this Shaman of the Pack? I mean, there's either going to be us and somebody else, or just us who wants this card.
Yeah. It's not, well, you might wheel the card, certainly. I would not say that it's impossible. But I think that one of the main reasons to take the Spider is that the Spider is just a much better card and a card that commits you a lot less, because you take the Spider, you could just abandon black. You take Shaman, you're still kind of locking into the two colors you have. So I like Spider, and I agree there's a chance you'll wheel it, but Shaman's a good enough card that I think it's not super likely that you wheel it.
I think so too. Also it makes me a little scary that somebody's going to be like, "Oh, Black Rain's open," and
Yeah, that is a disadvantage. If someone sees a 7th pick Shaman, they might be like, "Well, Black Rain's open," but well, maybe that it is not the case. But the other thing you have to look at is what are people taking from the pack. I always try to count like what are the best cards in the pack, and if that, this is not a kind of pack where Shaman is the 6th best card. Shaman's a little higher than that. So.
Yeah. I think Enshrouding Mist is probably the best card out of this pack, and then there's other playables here. So, and we're not done. We've got the foil uncommon that I mentioned before we get to our rare. It's a darn good one, Luis. It's Swift Reckoning.
I like Swift Reckoning too. I don't like it enough to take it over Spider, but I do like it.
Agreed. Also, non-bow. Like if you put him in the arena, the Spider just smashes Swift Reckoning. Our rare is Nissa's Revelation.
Well, it's a combo with Spider.
It is, yeah. 5 GG, sorcery, scry 5, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature, you draw cards equal to its power and gain life equal to its toughness. You can see how that combo works. But it's actually very mediocre. It's really funny to look at if you lay out even your green decks. Usually your best case scenario is a Rock Smaulers. That's, it's that, or maybe you have a Spider, maybe you have a Gorger or whatever, but for the most part, like your peak is getting it 4 life and 4 cards, which is really good. I would pay that. That's Sphinx's Revelation territory. But sometimes you don't hit, and sometimes you get 2 life and 2 cards, and I would not pay 7 mana for that. So I'm a little down on Sphinx's Nissa's Revelation. I think it's not very good. Even though I have ran it, and I'm sure there's some decks that I could see just spinning the wheel and hoping to get there, but I just don't. I would rather just take like a sure thing like this. I mean, the Spider's definitely better than it, but even looking through this pack, like there's other cards I would take over Nissa's Revelation. The Eyeblight Assassin I would take over it. Maybe even the Titanic Growth and the Weight. Yeah, I'd probably take those over it too. I just don't think Nissa's Revelation is very good.
I agree. I built a couple decks with it, and even in decks where it's got good support, where it's got some Leaf Guilders, it's got some big creatures like the Spider, it just doesn't perform. It's too easy to miss. Too often it's just gain 2, draw 2 or something along those lines, and I think you can't pay 7 mana for this effect.
I agree. So to recap, our picks are Guiltleaf Winnower, Somberwald Alpha, Sky Snare Spider, and we've got one more pack. This is the one that Obi opened. The Beatdown. All right, so let's take a look. Smash to Smithereens. Or actually, I should look, at the rarities here, where we've got all 3 uncommons and our rare. So there's only commons been taken out of this pack so far.
All right.
Smash to Smithereens, no. Amprint Tactician, it's a card. Send to Sleep, get out of here. Kithian's Tactics, nah. Undead Servant, it's on color for us, but it's pretty darn unexciting.
I've never really gotten the Undead Servant deck to work.
Me neither. I mean, I've made a zombie or 2 in my day, but it's never been very impressive. The problem is you have to play Undead Servant. Dreadwaters. Combo with Undead Servant? No. This is Pilgrimage. The ramp spell. We don't want that. I don't think. I mean, even with a Winnower and a Sky Snare Spider, it's probably better just to hit normal.
Yeah.
So that brings us to our uncommons. Our first one is Sigil of Valor, the 2 colorless equipment, 1 to equip, and whenever the equipped creature attacks alone, it gets +1/+1 till end of turn for each other creature you control.
I think this card is one of the more underrated cards. going into the Pro Tour, I didn't have a super high opinion of it, but a lot of people really like it. And after watching it play more, yeah, the card is pretty good.
I think it sucks.
I do not think it sucks.
You know why I don't like it?
Why is that?
Are you going to guess?
Is it because it doesn't do anything?
On defense?
Yeah.
Like, I like to find myself in a position where I have a big board state and I can get an attack in with, a lesser creature. Like, that's good. When it works, like when you've got 4 creatures and one of them's a 1/3 or a 1/1 flyer and you can hook this thing up and attack, it does perform. It's good. It gets in a lot of extra damage and it puts your opponent in a weird spot. But man, when you're behind, you get off to a slower start and you play a Sigil of Valor, you just want to cry. Like, it just doesn't do anything to the board and it doesn't help you block. And that's why I just don't prioritize cards like this. Like, I have this lower than basically all of the playable combat tricks, for example. Maybe there's a tokeny deck, something like a red-white deck with a couple of dragon fodders and a couple of gear crafters or something where all of a sudden this thing really hits so hard that you can't ignore it and you only really need to resolve a spell or two to make that board state that I outlined. But if I'm playing like a normal 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5s type curve, I really have this one not that high on my list.
I think the effect is powerful enough that you can build your deck to kind of take advantage of it. It just means you don't need any good creatures, you just need creatures.
That's true. And I like that part about it because I've definitely seen this thing break up stalls, right? Where you're just kind of staring at each other and all of a sudden it goes on something and it's like, attack you for 5. And you're looking and you're like, that is a stupid 1/1. I'm not going to triple block it just to get rid of it because then they're just going to equip to something else. So it does have a positive effect in those scenarios. I just think people tend to underrate how often the opposite happens. You know what? This is one that I just haven't seen lately is Necromantic Summons. The 4 and a black sorcery, put a creature card from a battlefield onto the battlefield from the graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. And if you've got spell mastery, it gets 2+1/+1 counters. It also features one of the more possessed versions of Elmer we've ever seen in artwork where
Yes.
Liliana got a hold of him. It's funny. This card seems to have performed pretty well the times that I've seen it go. Now, it might not be a coincidence that the times I've seen it go are the times when there's a good target for it in the yard, and the other times I never saw it go because there wasn't a good target. But I don't know. The fact that if you can get spell mastery and get back virtually anything, it makes it into a 2/2 becomes a 4/4 with this, just a vanilla 2/2. And anything that you get above that is great, assuming that you have spell mastery. And then, of course, you can also get back bombs and such. I think this card's pretty decent. It's not really, my kind of card, but I don't know. I've just seen it perform well enough time and time again that I think it's like a card you can play.
I agree. It's not as situational as it really looked to me, especially since getting 2+1 counters is a real thing. It's still not a card I'm like super in love with, but when you have cards like Guildleaf Winnower and Skysnare Spider, it definitely gets, becomes a higher value card.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, getting back either of those is super nice. Also, I think it's our best option here. Like, do you have Sigil of Valor above it? Or
No. Even though I like Sigil of Valor more than you do, it does not go well with the 3 cards we have. We've got a bunch of great attackers already and just good creatures in general. We're not really needing to power those up.
Right.
Necromantic Summons is kind of like the opposite. It takes advantage of having good creatures, whereas Sigil takes advantage of having bad ones. I would rather take the summons here.
Maybe that's my problem. I only play good creatures.
Yep, that's probably
Rogue's Passage is our next one. Interesting colorless.
Passage?
Yeah, Rouge's Passage. I'm sorry. I corrected somebody on the air as a joke for that when you were playing. By the way, it was a tribute to you.
It was only a tribute.
I think it was maybe JVL or something. I think he thought I was serious too. But anyway, Rouge's Passage is the one that you can pay 4 to give a creature, make it so that it can't be blocked. I don't know. This card has definitely held its own. I just can never really figure out when to take it, and I think other people take it higher than I do, so I almost never end up with these.
Yeah, I kind of agree. It's a good card, and I want to play it in my decks, but I also don't want to third pick it, so I guess I don't get to play it all that often.
Yeah. I like Summons better than it, and our rare is kind of a it's a Yavimaya Coast, the blue-green Painland, which I don't think we want at all here. I would take Necromantic Summons.
Yeah, I believe that's where I'm at too.
I'm a little concerned. Our picks are so far 5-drop, 4-drop, 6-drop, 5-drop. We do need to look for those leaf gilders and such to kind of make it work. But I like the card quality. I think the summons goes well with our deck. I think that Winnower's Spider and Somberworld Alpha are all very solid creatures too. So I'm not even that sad about where this deck is going. I'll say that as we transition in the middle of the pack, my brain would be focused on making sure that I start filling out those early drops, because it's so important in this format to get something down early so that you don't get ran over by the Token Free Blades and such of the world. Tim's in white. Tim or Will is in white, I would say.
Yes, that seems fairly likely.
White red seems to be kind of the read I would put on it. I mean, there was an Amprint Tactician in that last pack. Well, now wait a minute. Now that I say that, there's also a Swift Reckoning in the pack
That's
before.
That's true.
That was a third pick, though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is a better sign then that it's third. Mm-hmm. It makes it less likely that he's playing white.
All right. Well, I'll stick with white red. Tim, how did the draft go for you?
So for Tim, it was kind of a weird one. He first picked a Boggart Brute. Okay. It was actually kind of a close pick with the Somberworld Alpha. Mm-hmm. I do really like the Alpha, but in general, I'm happier being in red than in green.
Yeah, the Brute's just a better card, I think.
It's like when it goes well with the Brute, you've basically got this insane flyer in red. Mm. But then Tim didn't really see a huge amount of good red after that. Mm-hmm. He second picked Leaf Gilder over the Spider, and more from a curve consideration standpoint than anything else. The Gilder's, I'm very happy to be running it anytime. And third picked Yeva's Force Mage, basically just sort of saying, I'm going to be this kind of aggressive red-green deck that's looking to build into something, but the something should come along.
Okay, interesting. So we got one of the colors right, but the other one's quite wrong for us. We have managed to put ourselves in a color that the person directly to our right is in, which is definitely not the way that you want to draft. Now, as this pack develops, I think that would start to become more clear to us. This was a tough one for us. And again, speaking to the randomness of packs, look what happened there, right? I mean, Tim took green cards over other green cards as we were taking green cards, right? So we're in a super awkward spot here with our draft as, we were getting past reasonable green cards and took those. It's just Tim was taking, other reasonable green cards in the same pack. What about, go ahead, Luis.
I was going to say, it can be tough. That's why you really have the whole first pack to try to figure this stuff out, because if we saw no more green cards the rest of the pack, we might kind of clue in and maybe try to switch. It is also possible that you can draft green if the person next to you is drafting green, as long as your second color doesn't overlap and you lean more on that. Yeah,
that's a good point. And I would prefer green to be our support color and not our primary color here. So if we can pick up another green playable or two, and I'm not talking about as good as the Spider and the Alpha, but if we pick up a Yeva's Force Mage for ourselves and something maybe even just a Recluse or whatever, then we should have green pretty well to ourselves for the second pack, as we passed almost none. It's going through both Tim and us. So we could get the most of the good green cards out of that pack. And then out of the third pack, we need another one to happen kind of like this, where a few of them sneak by and we pick up a few good green cards, and then the rest of our cards are black. That can happen. It's not ideal, but it can certainly work out. What did Will take?
Will started out on a Knightly Valor. In any of my white decks, that if I'm topping out on Knightly Valor, I'm pretty happy. Just makes anything pretty dangerous.
Well, I actually wanted to know how Will felt about it, though, not you. So.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, Will felt similarly.
Okay. Turns out you guys have similar taste.
Ish. Yeah, I tried to put myself in some different shoes, but ultimately my feet didn't change size. So.
Right, fair.
And yeah, he then took Suppression Bonds over the Swift Reckoning. Basically, just sort of. I've definitely had some white decks where I'm not in love with Swift Reckoning, but I always want to be playing Suppression Bonds.
Okay.
So he's very solidly in white, and looking to stay that way. And then we just have the one card for Obi. He started out on Girapur Gearcrafter, and is looking to be, sticking with a relatively aggressive red shell.
Yeah, that makes sense. And this pack really did kind of run out by the time it got to us. There wasn't a whole lot here, right? We took the summons out of it, but there was an Amprint Tactician and some mediocre stuff here anyway, so that makes a lot of sense. All right, well, that was fun. Hopefully for you at home listening, you were able to follow it. That's always the thing that I'm nervous about when we do this. We also get sometimes requests to do like a sealed pool on the air, which I've never done because it's so cumbersome.
I don't see how you could keep all the cards in your head.
No, I just don't understand. I mean, one thing that somebody did recommend or suggest is what I mean, that I think is a decent idea is to do it kind of like homework style, where we like do a pool, like we put a pool up one week and give the listeners a chance to look at it on the blog or on the site or whatever for the ones that want to kind of play along. And then we build it live on the air together, you and I, over Skype or whatever. And then they'll know, at least have an idea of what they wanted to do with it and see if it matches up. I don't love it. I don't think it's like a super clean way to do it, but there also isn't one. So I don't know. It's something I'm kicking around, but maybe it'll happen. But this one I think is doable. Like hopefully the discussion was useful to the listeners and not too muddled. Also I wanted to mention, Aaron and Wes, if I didn't, thanks for the packs there too. Okay. We've got one more short little segment before we wrap up the show here. Tim.
Hi.
We were having an interesting lunch conversation today, and you were telling me about a tool or a technique or an idea that you use sometimes in the infancy of a new set to help you kind of push the boundaries a little bit. Why don't you talk to us about what it is that you do and why and how it's worked? And then, Luis and I will kind of pick your brain.
Yeah, so this is something I've been doing for a while, and it came out of a situation kind of similar to what you had in your question at the start of the show, where I felt like I was getting stuck in a bit of a rut with my playing, and I didn't necessarily feel like that was down to the plays I was choosing to make so much as the quality of my decks wasn't letting me get above a particular level when it came to my drafting. So I started just pushing myself outside my comfort zone a little bit. I think it can be quite easy to find a particular strategy that you kind of like, or get stuck in a mindset of sort of, this is what constitutes a good card, and then you'll just do the same thing again and again and again. And if you're not winning with it, then either you're wrong or you're just doing something wrong in your play. Mm-hmm. So I now have kind of a couple of phases that I go through whenever a new set comes out. Very top of the set, I'll just draft. And that will, I will sort of follow this kind of, what would Richie Hohen do is my kind of...
He's your litmus test.
He's my immediate sort of... If I want to work out what I want to do at the very start of a set, I know that his approach is take the good cards.
Yes, rock solid.
Yeah. It's not about synergy, it's just about having powerful cards, and if you have enough powerful cards, you'll have a powerful deck. And that's a very strong strategy, full stop, and it's something that if I don't have any more information, I feel like it's a great beginning point. But once I feel like I've got a bit of a feel for how cards play, firstly, I draft a lot more in real life than I do online. And I have found that something that I find myself doing all the time in real life drafts is watching as many decks as I can. So obviously I'll see what my opponent's up to and see how that works out for them. But between games, I'll be the one, I guess this is probably a coverage thing that I get this from. I like just wandering around tables, seeing who's winning and what with.
And using that as kind of a data gathering thing for how you view the format, what you want to do.
So that's a jumping off point for me, basically going, what looks like a powerful plan or a fun plan or an interesting plan even that I then want to draft. And once I've got a plan, it doesn't have to be a good plan, but I will go for it to the point of foolishness. At the moment, something for Magic Origins I'm playing around with is I love a 2-drop in this format. I feel like the games where you miss on your 2s, you're immediately way behind if your opponent doesn't. And the games where you play 2-drop, 3-drop, or even 2-drop, 2-drop is exactly where I want to be at the start. It feels a bit like Zendikar draft in that. So yesterday I was in a draft where I set myself the rule that I'm always going to take a 2-drop creature if there's one in the pack, unless there is a complete bomb. To the point of it being silly. So I'll take. So
you've set an extreme draft rule for yourself by way of experimentation here.
Yes.
Because, Luis and I talk on the show, and we, I think we showed it during the Crack-A-Pack session here, that we're about staying open, right? Yeah. And trying to find where your lane is supposed to be. But you're saying, I understand that, but I'm throwing it aside in the name of science.
Yeah. And this isn't this is what I'm going to be doing forevermore going forward. But I feel like sometimes to really get the measure of how good an idea is, you need to push it a little bit further because otherwise you'll chicken out. I know that
and you'll go back to just drafting a good deck.
I'm not necessarily a very disciplined drafter unless I have a very clear rule set to work with. So rather than me just sort of hemming and hawing and taking sweet cards here and there, I'll force myself down a disciplined route even if the route I'm taking is a bad one.
A slightly reckless one.
Yeah.
Even. Now, what was the one you decided to do here with the 2-drops?
So it was always take a 2-drop over a non-2-drop, or unless there's an obvious bomb. And by that we're talking, I took a Chandra's Fury, for example.
Ignition?
Chandra's Ignition, yes, sorry. I took a Chandra's Ignition over a 2-drop because, well.
Yeah.
But that was pretty much the only case that happened. And then by the time it got to pack 3, if the 2-drop was something that's clearly not in my colours, then I wasn't going much further. And in this particular case, it worked out great.
What did your deck look like? What colours was it?
It ended up being green-white, so didn't end up playing the Chandra's Ignition, which I was kind of surprised by at the time. But by forcing myself to be in lots of 2s, I ended up naturally getting more Timberpack Wolves than I might otherwise have. And the first pick of the draft was Knight of the White Orchid.
Which it's not a bad 2.
As it turns out, is an insane 2-drop because it means that you can cast 2 2s on turn 3 sometimes. But
you have the 2-drops to cast.
Absolutely.
Do you remember how many 2s you ended up with in the draft?
In
was
total,
it the vast majority
including,
of your creatures?
Grasp of the Hieromancer, and there was a couple of other spells at 2. But in total...
Does Grasp count as a 2-drop for this?
It does not for this, but in terms of, just laying out on a curve.
Oh, okay.
We had 14 2-drops in the deck. Which is crazy. It meant that mulligans were super duper easy because you were basically assured of hitting a 2 even in the face of mulligans. And
you also had to mulligan less, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely.
2-lander? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. A 2-lander, you knew that you're probably casting spells on the first 3 or 4 turns. Well, not the first turn, but certainly 2, 3, 4, you're pretty solid. And in my experience, the 2-drop on turn 3 or even turn 4 isn't that much worse than what anyone else is doing anyway. And it worked out super well. It's not necessarily something I would do exactly the same next time, but the whole thing whenever I'm going in with one of these hardline plans isn't that that's what I'm going to be doing forevermore. I'm happy, well, maybe not happy, but I'm content for one of these plans to crash and burn. Just because at least then I know. And for me, getting the personal experience of that is just kind of really helpful.
Do you find that you learn a lot from doing it? I'm assuming, look, if you want to sit down and draft optimally, meaning draft the best deck that'll give you the best chance of winning, you've set that aside. So you know
Correct.
that you're probably, now, there will be times when this actually ends up being, a great strategy that you've discovered. But for the most part, you're probably giving up value on it. But your goal is what? To kind of analyze it after the fact and see what you can pull from it. Not just yes or no, this worked, but more like what worked about this? What did I like? What did I not like?
Yeah. So one of the things that it tends to do very well is forces you to play with cards that you might otherwise never get hold of because someone else is picking them ahead of you. So occasionally you'll just find a diamond in the rough or a card that you realize that it gets better in multiples. And you realize because you end up with multiples because you're doing something weird. It's one of those things where it's really just about finding out where synergy might trump power a lot of the time. Because a lot of these plans end up being, if I take a ton of exploit cards, how good can exploit deck be? Or something.
Pushing something to an extreme, all the elves, whatever.
And, if you're gunning really, really hard for an elf deck and the elf deck's still bad, that's a useful data point.
Sure.
It means that then in Innistrad draft, say, I tried to make red-black vampires be a good deck, and it just wasn't in practical terms. And it reached the point where I would open an Olivia Voldaren and go, this is a really rough place to be in because this card's obviously great, but equally I know that the shell that it's going to go in is going to be a little shaky. But yeah, when I'm in a draft, I don't play in a lot of peace queues, so it's more just a matter of when I'm in a draft where I really want to thump, the rest of the field, either because I've had a rough day and I just want to crush people, or because I'm playing people that I, get a bit more of a sense of pride from beating. So a lot of the coverage drafts, There, I'm just like, right, now I'm going to do something good. But I feel like I have more tools to do something good because I've tried more different things.
Yeah, that's great. Luis and I are both big proponents of experimenting, specifically with difficult to rate rares.
Yep.
Early on in a format when it first comes out. And him and I are both take the similar line of being just like, sure, like I'll try that rare out. Let's see what it does. Cause there's a lot of rares that have so much text on them that it's like, where does this fit in? What does this actually do to the game? And, you'll kind of get an idea for, that one didn't really work out and it's not one I'm going to prioritize. And, this is a hidden gem here. This card's really good, but you're actually taking this to a much bigger level and you're taking it to an entire strategic level, whether it be, with cards that are, synergistic with each other, like you mentioned, elves or, some type of tribal synergy or whatever. Or even in this case, you just said casting costs. That was your restriction. You're like, I want to have as many 2-mana creatures as I can in this deck. And that's going to be the thing that I harp on. I find that, interesting that you're willing to take it that far.
Yeah. I mean, it like the rules will vary a lot based on my mood, what I've seen other people do that looks sweet. I mean, at the start of this format, at first glance, it looked like there were lots of good build-around uncommons in Origins.
Yeah, it did. We were kind of excited about it, and
it didn't really pan out. I had a few Blightcaster decks that were pretty good. Obviously, Sphinx's Tutelage, when it works, is great. But yeah, there were. I mean, when I looked at sort of, your ether grids and whatnot, it felt like it could have been a good idea, and I did try it out. Conveniently, if you want those, you can get them. But because everybody wants to take the Thopters, it never really quite worked out for me. And
But you learn that early on.
Yeah. If you try it super early, I mean, the good thing about this is that if there is a weird niche deck that proves to be good, you tend to be on it before everyone else. So you get a few really sweet drafts where just everything comes together.
Yeah. Luis, what do you think about this sort of extreme approach to testing here where, Tim's basically sacrificing value now to push hard in a direction in order to kind of feel it out and see what's there?
It's terrible.
I knew this would happen.
Good show, everybody.
No, actually, I actually do like this, and I did this exact thing a couple weeks ago. So this was about a week before the Pro Tour, actually like 5 days before the Pro Tour, and one of the other guys on our team, Shuhai, was talking about how one of the people he from Japan, he actually described him as I think he said the Travis Wu of Japan, but which is awesome. Travis is
brewer.
Is an awesome dude. Was forcing this blue-black deck that I ended up actually talking about on the show a couple weeks later. This blue-black deck where you're just trying to pick up bonded constructs and
miscreants
and fairy miscreants and thornbow archers and warhorn and all that stuff. And I was like, wow, this sounds kind of insane. He posted 4 or so screenshots of decks he had drafted. And I'm like, well, I don't know if this is good. It's using a ton of cards that sound bad. So I'm going to go ahead and force this deck to try to see if it's good. And my first draft in, I took Thornbow Archer pick 1 over Fiery Impulse. I think I actually talked to you because we were about to record the show.
Yes.
And I was like, I just took Thornbow Archer over Fiery Impulse. You're like, why did you do that?
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know if we can record the show today.
Right. We almost parted ways.
But I was doing exactly what Tim describes here, which is kind of like rapid iteration testing, which is, yes, I could try to wait until this was open to try to draft it. But honestly, this was, first of all, such a weird archetype. Second of all, I don't even know if it's going to ever be, quote, open because all you want is cards no one else wants. It's not like you see one of these 5th pick and you know it's time to draft it. It's more like you just start from the beginning drafting this and people aren't going to take your cards. It gives you a really good window into seeing how good this kind of thing is. You do want to do it a few times. I think that doing it just once or twice won't give you the full picture because part of forcing is drafting a deck when you shouldn't be drafting it, when the person to your right is drafting something that would make it difficult. So you do it once or twice and you might just end up doing it when you're not supposed to. If you force a deck like this, I ended up forcing it around 5 or 6 times before concluding it wasn't good. Mm-hmm. But I feel like I got a lot of value out of that. That was it, because again, like Tim says, if the thing that you're trying to force is good, you have a huge leg up over everyone else. I would have loved to go into the Pro Tour knowing that this deck was awesome and feeling confident in first picking a Fairy Miscreant. As it turns out, I don't think the deck was good enough, but you know, I still got a lot of value out of it because my first round, I played against Li Shitian, who was playing this deck.
Oh, yeah.
He played Fairy Miscreant turn 1, Thornbow Archer turn 2, Fairy Miscreant turn 3. And the strength there is that I got to sideboard completely differently than I would have had I been playing against had I not known what this deck was and just seen those cards. I don't think I would have gone quite as deep in sideboarding. But because I had drafted this deck a bunch of times, I was able to adjust to it because I was at least aware of it. Even if I didn't personally think it was something that was a good plan, I at least had experience with it. And one of the best ways to do that is to just go all in on the archetype a few times just to kind of get your feet wet and try to feel where it's coming from. So I think this is a very useful tool. And another reason that it's good is it's also a lot of fun. Sometimes it's fun just to force something sweet. So
yeah, the Willoughby beatdown testing. Tim,
exactly.
do you have any, before we let you go here, do you have any recommendations for how to do this best? Because we're kind of aiming at a portion of our audience who drafts often, a lot of times on Magic Online.
Yeah, you need to have extra drafts to spew off before you really
you're a Friday night drafter, because a large portion of our audience drafts about one time a week, maybe two. And this probably doesn't apply to them because they're going to want to try to draft a real deck at their local FNM that they get to play. But, if you're somebody who plays a lot on online or you got a big draft group that goes, how far do you push this? Like, is there a limit that, is there any guidelines you'd recommend for somebody wanting to employ this tactic?
So for online, the first thing I would say is do it in Swiss queues. And that's not down to the competition. It's just that you want to see this weird deck in more matches.
Especially because the chances that it's not good are probably higher than if you had drafted a solid whatever deck.
If you do this in an 8-4, and you lose the first round, sometimes you just lose the first round. That just happens. But you want to know whether or not you've lost the first round because your deck is just objectively bad, or because you happen to you happen to play against the guy with a good deck. The other thing in terms of coming up with a good plan, because there are certainly some plans that are closer to being a non-starter at the beginning anyway. The way that I tend to do it is watch a lot of games, and just as soon as you see someone doing something and you think their deck is sweet, and as long as it's not just, they have this good card, hence their deck is sweet. If someone's got the Hix's Prison Warden deck, they've just got a deck with a good card in.
Right. But if you see somebody with 3 gear per Aether Grids down or whatever, they're going off, you're like, oh, that looks sick.
Yeah, when I was playing 2-drop draft, we played against someone who was being amongst the most aggressive red-white decks I've ever seen. I think that they had 3 Kythian's Tactics.
Oh yeah, just Infectious Bloodlust and just
all of the 1-drops. And those, their jailers weren't jailing a whole lot. They were just getting stuck in because they were being that aggressive. And I looked at that and I thought, I want to try pushing that. Because normally when I'm drafting red-white, unless it's an Anointer of Champions, maybe a Jailer, I'm not going to go that far on 1-drops. I'm not sure how many Bonded Constructs I normally want in that deck.
But the key here is that you're going to draft Swiss if it's online, and you're going to use other people's draft decks as sort of flags for you to say, that's a path that I want to explore as like a
or just talking to people. Anytime that someone's got a deck that is cool enough that they come across to show you because it's sweet, there's probably a good sign that you want to pay attention. If it's just got good rares in, then that's nothing. But at one of the Pro Tours, Andrea Mengucci came across and he's like, I've got this amazing green-black deck. And I sort of said, how did you end up with this? And he proceeds to lay out this grand high plan of, I know I want this many things in this role, this many things in that role, this many things in the other role. And at the end of the conversation, I would defy anyone to not want to go away and try drafting that deck.
Sure.
As soon as you see something cool, just have a bash.
Okay. Well, that's cool. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's definitely a route that some of our listeners might want to try out. As they're testing out, we're always looking for more tools and ways to explore these draft environments. And I kind of like just going hard. That's pretty sweet.
It's super fun as well.
And it looks super fun.
Well, there's a couple advantages to it. It's definitely fun. It's also a good use of time. Again, if you're going to do someone who's going to do tons of drafts in the format, then maybe you can just kind of figure it all, come out in the wash. You're eventually going to have an opportunity to do all these things. But when you don't have infinite time and you want to figure it out, especially if you want to figure it out before everyone else does, then forcing definitely accelerates that. And, sometimes, like, again, another point that Tim made that was good was that it forces you to try cards you wouldn't or otherwise try. And that gives you some exposure to things you wouldn't normally think of.
Right. And I think that's a big strength here to doing this. Again, not for the faint of heart. The failure rate is going to be higher than your average deck, but you could strike gold, and that always has a good thing. My general strategy is to wait until these decks beat me and then try them out. But whatever. I think that if you're more curious or if you want to kind of push the boundaries yourself, I think it's perfectly reasonable to employ Tim's method. So, Tim, thanks for taking the time to come on and help us out with the Cracker Packs and to give us some insight. We're going to wrap up the show here. I did want you to have a chance to let people know where they can find you and your writing and your coverage and all that.
Yeah. So on Twitter, I don't tweet as often as Marshall would like, but I'm Tim's Wheelbarrow. I also write for magicmadhouse.co.uk, one of the UK-based card vendors. I edit that site too, so my fingers in the pies there a lot. And then, of course, on Pro Tour and GP coverage.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming along. Of course, this show is brought to you each and every week by channelfireball.com. Go there for a slew of free content, including articles, videos, and podcasts. You can find this show on there every week, as well as a full selection of singles, sealed product, and supplies. You can get it all at channelfireball.com. If you want to find us on social media, I am Marshall_LR, and Luis is LSV on Twitter. And you can find everything related to the show at lrcast.com. There's a whole bunch of links right on the front page. It will get you hooked up with whatever it is you need, whether it's our Twitch channel or YouTube channels, streams, whatever. It's all there, including the blog, by the way, on lrcast.com, where you can find that review I talked about. I put up the Cracker Packs on there every week. I try to keep that refreshed and full of good value and content for you. That will do it for this week. Next week, I want to remind you, it's a big special show. It's going to be Ryan Spain.
How special can it be if I'm not involved?
Yeah, it's going to be Ryan Spain.
Oh, extra special, actually.
And me. And we're going to be at PAX doing the show live as a panel. If you're going to be at PAX, it's going to be on Saturday at 12:30. You might want to come a little early. I'm going to have some giveaways for people. I've got everybody that attends is going to get something. And we're really excited to do the live show. We will be recording it and releasing it as a podcast for those of you that can't make it out to PAX. It's also going to be videotaped. So it will be available for consumption after. But if you are going to be at PAX, we hope to see you there. It should be really fun. We're going to set aside, we're going to go for an hour, 12:30 to 1:30, and we're setting aside a big chunk of time for listener questions as well, because we want to interact. I mean, the difference doing a show live in front of an audience means we get to interact with you. And when we're here, in the studio, as it were, or my living room, I can read stuff and we can get some interaction going, but it's not the same thing as having you sitting right in front of us. So I'm really excited for that. And it's going to be an awesome episode 300, I hope. That's going to do it for this week. We'll talk to you guys next week.
So talking about the mythic uncommons earlier, made me think of the cards that I've liked drafting the most. And it is kind of interesting looking at this list. So I made I made a top 5 list of cards I've liked drafting around. And this is of all time.
Oh, baby.
The first one on the list, number 5, is actually a pretty recent addition. It's Ruthless Deathfang from Dragons of Tarkir. This is the 4 blue black 4/4. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, your opponent sacrifices a creature.
You just always had one of these, too.
I always had one or two of them. I think I had an average of like 1.3 in my decks by the end of the format.
You were just drafting decks assuming that you would have one at some point because you always did.
My favorite combo with this was Sidisi's Faithful, the 1 blue 0/4 where you exploit to bounce a creature, because it basically meant that there's a bunch of things you could do. The first one, the one that was the most common, was you'd play Deathfang, then immediately play Faithful, sack Faithful, bounce your opponent's second worst creature, and bounce your opponent so they had their best creature left in play, bouncing their worst creature, if they only had 2. Mm-hmm. And if they had more, you just bounce like something that's a threat and then make them sacrifice. But basically you could stack it so that first the thing got bounced and then they had to sacrifice. Another combo is to just sacrifice a creature to bounce Sidisi's Faithful, making them sacrifice creatures. You can basically pay 1 blue and make both players sacrifice, which if you had random creatures lying around, it was pretty good. So even though I didn't really like drafting blue-black in that format, the Deathfang was a reason for me to do so. But number 4 here is Goblin Slide, another pretty recent addition.
You're on a real heater here early.
Yeah, I guess the last couple sets have had cards I really like. I like Goblin Slide so much I actually bought the original art for it.
Do you have it in your office there? Or?
I do. It's hanging up in my office.
That is so cool.
I just love Goblin Slide, and unlike Ruthless Deathfang, Goblin Slide was a little worse. I think that it was harder to justify drafting Goblin Slide exactly, but every now and then it had its moments. and you know, the challenge was part of the fun, really. You just draft Goblin Slide, you draft so many spells, it's just awesome.
There's nothing more humiliating to losing to Goblin Slide, too. It's like, how did this happen?
Yeah, it was a pretty incredible card, and from here, though, it gets a little wackier. Number 3 was Cruel Ultimatum. This was back in Shard's block. This is a sorcery that costs blue, red, black. Your opponent sacrifices a creature, loses 5 life, discards 3 cards. You gain 5 life, draw 3 cards, and return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. So basically, when you cast this card, you win the game. Because it's a 10-point life swing. It's like an 8-card, swing on the board, or between the board and the hand. And in general, Cruel Ultimatum is the exact kind of card I wanted to first pick, because it leaves you pretty open, assuming that at the end of the day you can cap 3 swamps, 2 mountains, 2 islands.
Leaves you pretty open.
I was so bad at draft during this time. It was so funny. I'd just be like, yeah, I just first picked Cruel Ultimatum and Force Grixis. Obviously, that's how you draft.
The card was just all of those were unplayable.
Well, no, it wasn't unplayable.
You couldn't cast them.
You could definitely cast this in shards. The problem was you shouldn't force it. Taking it first is obviously just insanely committing. But no, Cruel Ultimatum was an actual card in that format. You could build your mana base to cast it if you took mana fixing very highly. And
God, I feel like I want my opponent to have that card in their deck.
I feel like I want to be the person with Cruel Ultimatum in my hand.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly more fun, but...
Well, it was a good card.
I mean, the card's a house. Yeah, the card's ridiculous.
I drafted a lot of decks around Cruel Ultimatum. It was just a ton of fun because it was the game of just survive and cast it and you just win. And that was it. So, number 2 is one I actually know that you share an appreciation for. That's Burning Vengeance.
Oh, yes.
I didn't want to include both Burning Vengeance and Spider Spawning, and I felt like Burning Vengeance was actually the one I really wanted to draft. This is a 2 and a red for an enchantment, and whenever you cast a card from your graveyard, you can deal 2 damage to a creature or player. Basically, flashback was a big thing in the set, and this is Innistrad, and you could just draft the deck full of like Dream Twist, the 1 blue mill for 3, flashback 1 and a blue, a bunch of flashback cards, think twice, and just go off. Like every card in your deck becomes a shock when you flash it back, and you can end up with 10 flashback spells in your deck pretty easily.
I remember that card.
I remember casting the 2 creatures can't block card that flashes back for 3 in a red or whatever.
Oh yeah.
when you have the double or triple Burning Vengeance deck, all of a sudden that starts looking pretty good. And one of the things I noticed about these cards is both Burning Vengeance, Goblin Slide, and then also actually even Ruthless Deathfang are all these engine cards that I really love drafting around. And this is the sort of thing that really appeals to me. And part of what really keeps me playing Magic is getting to draft cards like this. So my number 1 card is not a card that works anymore.
Ooh, number 1.
Under the rules, it actually doesn't function the way I want it to.
Oh no.
And that card is Reverse the Sands.
Well, I don't even know what that is. Tim does.
I do.
Yeah. 6 white sorcery. This is from Champions of Kamigawa.
One of your favorite formats, right?
It was, and part of the reason was Reverse the Sands. And
so this is a rare? Wait, did you say 6 white?
It's totally worth it.
It costs 8. Okay.
What you do
is be insane.
Is you assign all life totals for all players. So basically, in a multiplayer game, it would mean you get to choose where all the life totals go. In a 2-player game, it just means switch life totals.
What? You're paying 8 mana to switch life totals?
Exactly. So the reason this no longer works under the rules is that mana burn is no longer a thing.
Oh, no way.
The way to play this card was awesome. You sit there, you don't do anything, you don't attack your opponent. The turn before you're going to cast Reverse the Sands, you mana burn down to 1, you cast Reverse the Sands, all of a sudden they're at 1 and you're at 20. You just drain life them for 19. And then you just kill them with anything.
You just attack them with literal any creature they can get through?
Yes. You have so much time. Like, you've got up to all that mana to do it. So, like, yeah, it'd be great.
Yeah.
That is absurd.
So the first Pro Tour I ever did well at was Pro Tour London. I think
my first Pro Tour on coverage.
Right? I don't know how you managed to get to London, but you were there somehow. And I was able to draft. So first of all, I'm at this point, I'm going into the last draft. It looks like whoever 3-0s this draft is going to make top 8.
Now, I want to stop. Was this a limited Pro Tour?
Yes, this is all draft.
This is before they had them split. Okay.
Right. All draft. So, this is...
Wow. So you got a draft for the top 8 if you 3-0.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever done well at a Pro Tour, mind you. And I'm in a position where if I 3-0, I'll make top 8 of the Pro Tour. And I open my first pack and there's a Reverse the Sands in it. I don't take the Reverse the Sands. I took a really good white uncommon, basically 4 mana 4/4 that whenever it attacks gets +1/+1. And Nagao Bound by Honor. It's a 3/3 but has Bushido 1. Anyway, I take Nagao Bound by Honor and I wheel Reverse the Sands. And at this point I was just like, rubbing my hands mentally because everyone else at the table, my table had a ton of great players. It had Tim Ayton, Antoine Rouel, Tommy Wallamies, Jeff Cunningham, just like a lot of people, some who were at least who was in the Hall of Fame and a number who you would recognize. And none of them knew about Reverse the Sands because they weren't quite as visionary weren't quite as much of a visionary as I was, or I just had no idea what I was doing. Who knows? In any case, I took Reverse the Sands, drafted this very slow blue-white-black control deck in a format where you don't normally go 3 colors. In round 1, I play against this guy, and I'm in such a bad position in game 2 that I just have to top deck Reverse the Sands to win. So at the end of his turn, I just mana burn down to 1.
My God.
Untap, draw, and concede. And he's like, why did you mana burn? And I was like, I just knew I was dead anyway. He's like, oh, okay.
He just thought you were like messing around or whatever?
Right. Game 3 we play. End of his turn, I mana burn down to 1, untap, cast Reverse the Sands, and win. And he just like looks at me. He's like, what? And just like, can't believe it. He's just sitting there. I leave the match. And he's just sitting there with his head in his hands. And as I'm walking away, the judge who was watching our match, who was his friend, was like, when he mana burned game 2, of course he had Reverse Sands. What else could he have? It didn't make any sense. Like, how could you not know it was Reverse the Sands? His opponent's like, I'd never even heard of this card. I ended up losing in the last round, so I did not make top 8. I top
that
16.
round, by the way, was one of the sweetest matches I've ever seen. The one against Tommy.
Oh yeah, my match against Tommy Wallamies was insane. It was one of the best matches I've ever played in my entire life. It was just absurdity after
stuck
absurdity.
Out in Tim's head after all these years,
including me getting decked by him casting Hinder, which counters a spell and puts it on the top or the bottom on his own spell to not get decked.
Oh wow.
So
no wonder that stuck out. Because at this time, Luis wasn't a big name in Magic, right?
I remember having to ask him how his name was pronounced because I didn't know.
Yeah,
whether he was a Lewis or a Louis. Wow, that's insane.
I think I had literally never done well in a tournament at this point. Like, that wasn't like a PTQ. Wow. But anyway, Reverse the Sands, not just because of that, just because of everything that I've used it for is my favorite card, and it's especially got the number 1 slot because I know it doesn't work anymore. So it kind of
it's
has locked up there.
Yeah, it's grandfathered in.
So if you didn't have a chance to appreciate Reverse the Sands, well, that ship has sailed.